So our buddy Levi Stevenson, Iowa State, was matching up, yes, Iowa State against various playoff teams. So we will do the same here. And so we've got Miami. Let's run them down. I may not know the seedings 12 down to 1, but we'll do something close to a countdown. Number 12, I believe, would have been the team that played Texas. That would have been Clemson, of course. So we've got two participants in the ACC who usually, they played in different divisions. So I was going to, in air, say that they regularly play. They did not, but of course, there's familiarity there. They just played in 2023. So Miami and Clemson, of course, a game that should have been played in the ACC to help determine the conference. How would you feel about that game having been played this past season?
I mean, when in the season? If it's early, I feel very confident about Miami. If it's late, I think it's a coin flip at best, just because the defense and like their improvement, Clemson's improvement on offense, particularly Cade Klubnik, and Miami's implosion on defense with injuries and poor performance, and just performances getting put on film. So these other coaches had things to scheme against, which Lance Guidry was unable to close those gaps. I mean, I think it's probably like 55% towards Clemson, 45% towards Miami, because Miami's offense is incredible and I think can play with anybody. I don't know if the defense would get enough of the stops that they needed. And I mean, look, even if it's only one or two in a game, would they have been able to do that? And Clemson's defense is still really good. So would they be able to get 2, 3, or 4 stops when they need them to really give that space? Would they be able to win the money downs like Georgia Tech? They could, because especially up front, they're still really good. So I'd say a little bit better than a coin flip's chance in Clemson's direction, probably.
That's fair. I can't push back on that. Clemson still had a really good defense, but I would say maybe their worst defense in more than a decade. It was not a Clemson caliber defense.
Yeah, no, it wasn't the most lockdown ever. But still Miami struggled at times, was down 35-7 against Cal, who's they have a defensive head coach and a good defense, but not even as talented or scheme sound as Clemson, so yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that, I don't think it would be a blowout, but yeah, I think that potentially even this Clemson defense, which isn't as good as some others, could have done enough.
Texas certainly had game control against Clemson. It was basically Cade Klubnik and TJ Moore, and I can't think of the other receiver off the top of my head right this second.
Antonio
Anyway,
Williams?
Yes, exactly. Those three guys played out of their minds, and they kept Clemson in that game. Otherwise, in terms of line of scrimmage,
Right.
wow, Texas was much better.
But then, so then putting that forward to, did you want to go to number 11, or can I go to number 5 since you mentioned Texas?
Sure, let's go to 5.
Right. So the other combatant in that game. So I believe that like Cam Ward, Xavier Strepo, and the offense in sum total could. I think that there would have been more than just those three who could do numbers against Texas, and having a better offense, because a better offensive line than Clemson. I think there's something there. I don't know that we would have been able to stop Texas, especially if Sark was in his bag, because in all these games, especially early, Sark was in his first 25 plays play script back. And I don't even know that he would need to necessarily be at the peak of his offensive play calling powers against the wet paper towel known as Miami's defense this past year. So I think maybe it would have been more of a shootout, more along the lines of the Arizona State game. But yeah, I mean, I think Texas wins that game, but I think it would have been explosive play after explosive play on both sides of the ball. And then Texas would have figured out, hey, we're going to run what we should have been running. And every time I watch them throughout the entire playoffs, there's a variety of scheme, but whether it is outside zone, stretch, wide, off tackle, toss, whatever it is going outside of the guard, whatever run play, invariably was unstoppable. And I think that they would have figured that out, and then Shark was sprinkled in a little bit of razzle dazzle, and they'd have been able to pull it out.
I don't want to discount Miami's chances because certainly Arizona State showed us, and I would put Arizona State on the same plane as Miami and a few other teams in the SEC, that Texas was far from invincible. However, that defense, boy, I think the 4 best defenses in college football played in the semifinals. And I don't know between Texas and Ohio State who was better. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
They were that close. And so I think Miami was capable of beating Texas, but Texas would win the game most of the time.
Yeah.
All right. We had a 6-11 matchup where, and just to extend on that point, I think most people would determine who was clearly, if not significantly, clearly the best team in the country this year. Number 2, though, I'm all over the place. I could take Oregon, I could take Notre Dame, I could take Penn State, I could take Texas as the second best team in the country. I don't know who it is.
Yeah, there's a reasonable argument for all of them.
So in the 6-11 game, we had Boise State as the 11 seed, who gave Penn State a pretty
SMU
good
the
test.
11 seed. SMU.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Well, yeah, they played. I was skipping on SMU, another team that Miami should have played this year.
I mean, again, if you win in Syracuse, that is the ACC championship game. I think that Miami would have won that game. It would have been 58-57 type thing. But yeah, I think Miami would have found a way. I applaud all of the players from SMU, and I know that they would have been hyped up, especially all the transfers. Like they're the Dallas Hurricanes, or the North Dallas Hurricanes, basically. Every single player except for Jennings, I believe, that made all conference was a transfer from Miami. Elijah Roberts, Jared Harrison Hunt, Jafari Harvey, the running back kid, Brashard Smith. Yeah, like that was all Miami dudes. Ja'Kai Clark at center, even, on the offensive line, like everywhere that you look, and the top players on their team were transfers from Miami, all of them. And then you add in, there was RJ Maryland, who's the son of a former Hurricane, Russell Maryland, but we didn't recruit him because he's too small at tight as a 6'1.5" tight end. And then Jennings, the quarterback. But yeah, that I just don't. Maybe it's orange and green colored glasses or whatever, but I really think that Miami would have beaten them in the ACC championship game, and I believe that if this was in the playoff, they would have found a way. It wouldn't have been 41-17 like it was in Gainesville. Shout out to you, George, in the comments. Thanks for watching, buddy. But yeah, I think that Miami would have won that game.
George is just tearing it up, picking all sorts of fights in the chat tonight.
I know. I clicked over and I read a couple of them, so I was saving that for him specifically. But yeah,
I don't know. George is maybe he's not. He just George is near and dear to my heart because he has commented to this channel and all the other channels more than anybody in the history of the network.
Absolutely.
But I don't know who else goes looking for fights when their team lost by 24 points to that team. But George will do it.
That's all right. Hey, it's just like the Sugar Bowl year. You lost the fight on Bourbon Street. Alex Brown shows up with the black and blue eye like this, and then lost the game as well. So, yeah.
Well, I think you've been very objective to date here. I would go Miami 60-65% chance of winning that game against SMU.
Yeah, I think, yeah. That works for me. Against Penn State, it comes down really to Drew Aller, like which Drew Aller shows up. I think this is another 55-58% Penn State lean. But even with Miami's defense not being great, Drew Aller was. I mean, look, he threw those two dimes in the first 5 throws in the quarterfinals against Boise. And those were the best 2 throws I've seen him throw in his life. And I was like, oh my God, maybe he's going to do something. There was talk going into the playoffs. If Drew Aller would have led Penn State to a championship with 1,000 yards and 9, 10, 11 touchdowns in those games, right? He might go to the NFL draft. And those first 5 throws against Boise State in the quarters made you think, oh my God, this is the talent of this kid. But then he just threw the ball to the other team and doing stupid stuff. So I think, 55 to maybe 60% lean towards Penn State, but Miami would give them a game. And could very well win.
Aller's exceptional from a skill standpoint. And deer in the headlights against Ohio State and Michigan in 2023. Watching him this season, I thought he was markedly improved just as a leader, being vocal, taking command, throwing with conviction, being decisive. But in the playoffs, not impressive against Boise State, but his team won the game. And then he gets in against Notre Dame. And wow, hate to say he threw it away because I don't like to throw it on one guy, but all right. I think Penn State's an excellent team, that they would likely beat Miami, but I would not be surprised in any way if Miami won the game. No, 60-40 Penn State.
Okay.
Let's move on to the, I guess we would have a 7-10 matchup with
11 Indiana.
Yes.
Kirk Signetti can hate me all he wants. Miami wins that game.
Yeah, I get your point. I get your point. Miami's Michigan. Indiana's best win was Michigan. There we go. Indiana's best win was Michigan. Forget 27-17. That's in the record books against Notre Dame. People will look 5 years from now and go, oh, that was cute that Indiana made the playoffs and actually put up a fight. No, it was 27-3 with 2 minutes. It was just not a good game. Their offense was completely, for an offense that was scoring 43 points a game. I think Miami's, for as many issues as Miami had on defense, their defensive front would have done similar damage, and Rourke would have done nothing, and they would have limited Indiana. So,
And
I think they win that game.
With all of these predictions, like even if I were to say Miami were going to win, it would be, 45 to mid 20s to 30s. Like, I'm not saying it would be, a blowout, or I think it might be like a little bit sizable of a score line at the end, but not, 58-3.
Slim Shady Canes, appreciate you being here, man. Miami was statistically better than Clemson offensively and defensively. We were out because we lost conference games instead of non-conference. Crap happens.
Agreed. Absolutely. Not really. I mean, this mental exercise is really, it's a hypothetical, like if Miami were to have made it, not adjudicating the fact of like why we did not. But Slim Shady Canes, you do make a good point there. So if I were to say, okay, be more on the Miami 65-70% would beat Clemson, then I think what you've offered supports that, like changing the ratio of winning as opposed to like, would we at all? So, but hey, this is a great comment and definitely added to the conversation. So thanks for chiming in.
I'll put the condition on these predictions, or not predictions, these hypothetical outcomes that were thrown out there. I believe that any of these teams could beat any of these other teams within these 12 on occasion. And I guess the most extreme would be like SMU against Ohio State, let's say. It could happen, but it's very, very unlikely in that case. But there's probably 8 to 10 of them are really in that 60-40 range. And if you threw in Miami, they'd be on that end with Clemson, SMU, whoever you want to throw in there, Indiana or better, Tennessee, maybe, touching that line. So they'd be in that 60-40 mix against just about everyone. All right. So then we've got, Notre Dame was the 7 seed.
I mean, we're going to find out Labor Day weekend, because that is the opener next year. Notre Dame coming down here to face Miami. That would have been really interesting. There was a time, when Miami was winning, that that matchup was potentially going to happen actually in this year's playoff, which would have brought with it all of the storylines of, Al Golden versus Miami versus that, all those kind of things. I think, it's obviously, y'all are going to say something because they made the national championship game. I think that Miami could have won this game, but it really comes down to what the defensive front seven for Notre Dame would have been able to do against Miami's offense. That, I think, would have told the entire story, because if they were able to really be physical against the run game and then force Miami into passing situations, which we know that we have the best quarterback in program history, or the best season from a quarterback in program history, still having just, 3rd and 18, 3rd and 14 would have been tenuous. Riley Leonard, he wasn't special at Duke. I don't think he was special at Notre Dame. But also just the defense was so bad. Oh my God. I think this was really, with how I look at things, I think that Miami versus Notre Dame in this year's playoff would have really truly been a 50-50, and just dependent upon how the flow of the game went. Were there turnovers? Are there penalties? What does their defensive front do? What does our defensive secondary do? What does our defensive front do? Like, Tyler Barron had 1 sack after the first 2 games of the year, or 2 sacks. I want to say he had 1, 3, and then half a sack in the first 3 games, and then 1 sack against Wake Forest. Like, the great disappearing Tyler Barron, which other teams said, Tennessee fans said that was going to happen. Like, nah, he's big and physical, and Jason Taylor's his coach now. He's going to figure it out. And he came on like gangbusters at the beginning and said, yo, he's figured it out. He's turned that corner. No, he didn't. But then, so you need him. Ruben Bain played with the strained hamstring the entire season. Does he get home? Simeon Barrow, first team all ACC, but everything. So, yeah, I could see that. I really think it would have been 50-50.
Dirty Kane thing is going Miami 42-21. Okay,
for next year's opener.
Okay, for next year's opener. Well, yeah, I got to see what these teams look like. That's
Hard Rock
I
will
say
be
Notre Dame. Okay, I say Notre Dame. I got you. I thought he was hypothetically like putting this playoff game at Hard Rock with Miami hosting Notre Dame. Okay, you're good, man. I say Notre Dame wins 65% of the time.
Okay.
All right. Then we've got a that was the 7-10, the 8-9's Ohio. We got to get to let's finish with the champs at the end. Let's go to the top 4 seeds. Oregon at the 1 seed position.
You talk about a game with all of the storylines. Like,
ooh,
yeah, Mario and his former team that that Dan Lanning is shepherding and adding on to the really incredible foundation left for him. Players that Cristobal recruited, players that Cristobal wouldn't even recruit at all. Josh Connerly, their starting left tackle, famously was not on Cristobal's board, even because he was a football player and basketball player at Seattle Rainier Beach High School, and 5-star, everybody's All-American, top 3 player in that class. And we're like, yo, he's going to go to Oregon. And many a person said, no, Cristobal was not recruiting that man. Left for Miami, Dan Lanning scooped in and was like, hey, you want to come here? We want you to come here. Forget that Cuban guy who's left. Come and be a Duck. And he's their starting left tackle, probably going to go to league this year, next year. Yeah, Dylan Gabriel in his 17th year versus Cam Ward. I mean, Cam Ward playing another team that he's played from before. Kiko Mawanoa, same thing when they were at Wazoo together, having played, it would have been all kinds of craziness. And I think that Oregon would have won probably 70% of the time.
I'm right there as well. And just to get your quick thoughts on this, just consider if we went through every college football game played the entire season, I wonder how many of those are 34-0 right before halftime, like 2% of the time.
Mhm.
And that's being done to the number one team in the country, the only undefeated team in the country. Just the blowout of epic proportions in the Rose Bowl.
Yeah. Another one that I turned off, by the way, because they just decided that they didn't. Why should we put a defender over by Jeremiah Smith? Why do we want to do that? Why would we want to stop him from anyways.
Ohio State clearly wouldn't do that on a regular basis, but I think they did show that they were the superior team. All right,
Yeah.
number 2, we had Georgia, not a vintage Georgia team, just a really good SEC championship team.
Miami against Georgia. Interesting. What a scenario that presents itself to be. The Georgia team that showed up without Carson Beck, I think, obviously would have been a team that Miami could have beaten. I know that Georgia is big and physical. I know, but they dropped a lot of balls. Like they had the most drops in the country from wide receivers, costing Carson Beck 60 something completions for maybe over 1,000 yards and multiple touchdowns and things. And yeah, I don't think this team had the juice, even though they won the SEC championship game and everything, but especially like when Carson Beck went down. Yeah. So I think it was closer to 50-50. I'd probably put it maybe 55-45 in Georgia's way. Just from the fact of their roster in total being just this is Miami versus those old Alabama teams in the 90s and like against Oklahoma back in the day, like smaller, faster Miami, bigger, stronger, more physical Georgia. You know what I mean? Like the comparable players in the comparable positions at Miami. You have a linebacker in Kiko Manoa who's 6'1", 220, and you have Smile Munden for Georgia who's 6'5", 240, playing the same position. You know what I mean? Apples to apples, that kind of a thing. So it would have been tough, especially because you're going to really rely on Miami's offense to do numbers. But I put it slightly in Georgia's favor, but especially without Carson Beck, who is your new Miami Hurricanes quarterback. But yeah, with what's his face, the backup Gunnar Stockton. Yeah, I think that would have really presented an opportunity for Miami to go win that game.
I think Georgia's more consistently a good football team, or a good football team more consistently. But it's a bad matchup for them. So I'm going to make it a toss up, a complete 50-50 game.
Yeah.
Boise State.
I'm going to keep it short and sweet. Miami.
Yeah.
Like I think that like Ashton Genty probably would have gotten numbers, but I don't think that they're going to hit all those throws. I don't think their quarterback is that good. And if the quality at that position isn't where you need it to be, then that levels the playing field with the obviously deficient Miami Hurricanes secondary and defense. So, and I don't think that they didn't have a chance in hell of stopping Miami, especially if Shannon Dawson decided, you know what? We're just going to run the ball. And we got all these running backs, even with Chris Johnson leaving, even with A.J. Allen leaving, but they probably wouldn't have left when they left if Miami was in the playoffs, right? But still, and this is another game where the team needed to just run the ball. Like I knew that they got those 2 touchdowns early from Drew Aller, but then when they went to Katron Allen inside and then Nicholas Singleton outside, gashing. And Boise, no. If I was Miami, I am. But in real life, if Miami were there, oh man, I'm begging and pleading for that matchup. They have a chance in hell.
Miami 41-27. All right, yeah. Arizona State, who I gotta give them a lot of credit. By the way, 11-0 picking playoff games here. That they did very much test Texas. I was very impressed with Arizona State, but I do think that performance was slightly an outlier.
Yeah, they hit a lot of the home run plays when they needed to, and that's how you have a game that's close. I like Miami here against Arizona State as well. I think probably in the same not the same proportion as Boise State. Boise State, I would put Miami like 90-10 to win that game. I'd say probably like 75-25. Like I really think that the matchup, especially with Miami's offense last year, like they didn't have the firepower to keep up with us. And eventually you're going to need to continue to score points. And I don't think they would have been able to score enough points even against Miami's defense. I think Arizona State presents another good problem for Miami, but I still would say probably in that 60-70% win range, just because, they hit some yellow balls.
I'm generally in the same range. I'm going to drop your percentages 10 to 15% on both of those matchups.
Okay.
Miami, Tennessee.
That's one that I really would have liked to have seen because I
Yeah.
think those were mirror teams of each other. I really think that would have been a toss-up. That's more of a 50-50 to me. I think that, and I said this during the time of the actual bracket and everything, it should have been Miami and Tennessee as the conversational point of comparison, as opposed to Miami and Alabama from this year. I really do believe that. So, yeah, I think that that's probably closer to a 50-50 game, and it really depends on, are we able to block James Pierce, which I think that we could have for the most part, and if Nico could hit, the deep balls that he needed, but I don't necessarily think that he would have. But they had a strong running game and everything. They definitely did have a strong defense. I think that's a 50-50.
I'm right there with you. I think people tend to see Tennessee. People tend to see Tennessee in a different light coming off that butt kicking in the playoffs, and that was what it was. Tennessee's a really good team. Yeah, I see that the same, 50-50. And Ohio State.
I mean, honestly, Miami's not Michigan. And there's the mental block or whatever that they have. And yeah, Michigan planting the flag in the horseshoe, which was lovely and glorious. I loved seeing Jack Sawyer lose his mind and choke up or grab the other player coach. They're not going to do this to us again, goddamn. I loved it. I laughed.
What's this have to do with Miami and Ohio State?
Hey, I'm getting there. This is my next statement. Even with that mental block and even with that stumbling and even with all of that, that emotion that whole team had to want to fight Michigan afterwards, because they didn't want to fight during the game. They didn't want to do anything during the 60 minutes, right? They all of a sudden want to play tough guy afterwards. That rallied that team, and they said, cool. We're going to keep that same energy. We're going to whip everybody's ass. And honestly, yeah, it would have been ugly. It would have been, it would, yeah. I hate to say it because I hate that team more than anything, but
sure.
Yeah, they would have.
I appreciate you being objective. That was an impressive playoff run.
I'm nothing if not objective.
Those four teams,
but you're not going to get. But no, okay. So to the original point, they struggle with Michigan in the way that Miami struggled with Florida State. Remember when I was coming on here and saying you have to beat that team twice? You got to beat them on the scoreboard, and you have to beat the mentality that they can come back and beat you. And as Miami lost all those games in a row to Florida State, I kept saying that because there were games that Miami was leading, right? And then could not close it out because Florida State had the fortitude of spirit to say we can be down 2 touchdowns, but we're not losing to these guys, and reference many years of performance to that end. In this way, right? Okay, Dirty Canes thing, right?
He has just discredited everything else he has stated in the chat.
But since Miami is not Michigan, Ohio State would not have that same mental block. And you clearly saw that in these other games where I think even prior teams coached by Ryan Day would have fallen short. I think I was not expecting them to speedboat or, boat race or Oregon the way that they did. I had never seen a Ryan Day coach team come together and perform to the 99th percentile of their potential, which through this run they did. And since their stumbles, struggles, mental block, whatever, is exclusive to their rival, which again, having been there and seen it with Miami against Florida State, if we're not that rival, especially, it's tough for me to think that we would have won, especially with the way the defense was too. I don't.
I
And I hate to
came
say it.
off of the Ohio State Michigan game in 2022 when Ohio State was pinned up against Georgia, and I thought I have zero confidence that this team's going to bounce back from this humiliation, but they had enough time to do it, and they regrouped, and they also had the right arm of CJ Stroud, and obviously we saw an epic game, and so they rose to the occasion. I was thinking the same thing this time around. I was thinking, are they just going to collapse and Tennessee's going to take them out? But if they get past Tennessee, then they might just elevate, because I have thought the entire season that they were the best team in the country if they're on their game.
Yeah, and I
All
mean,
right,
look, there were a lot of people who thought the same. You know, a lot of the season ticket holders from there sold their season tickets because they didn't want to necessarily go and, you know, see like lose to Michigan and then have a home playoff game and lose back to back within 3 weeks. Like there was a lot, yeah, but they figured it out and worked them things out behind closed doors. And yeah, I hate to see it. I hate to see it. That's not, you know, fictional or hyperbole. No, I actually literally hate to see it, guys. Like I was watching reality TV instead of the national championship game because I hated to see it that much. Like